On today's video, we're going to be talking about baits that you need to be throwing during the wintertime. All right, everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today, as I said, we're going to be talking about baits that you want to be throwing during the wintertime. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of this video, I want to make sure that I say that, you can fish pretty much any bait that you could find in a tackle shop during the wintertime. But I will say that more so than any other time of the year, I think wintertime is one of those time periods where a lot fewer techniques really are effective day to day. And another observation that I've had over the years is soft plastics start to play less of a role. Which, the rest of the year you could fish soft plastics exclusively and do extremely well. But during the wintertime, with the exception of a few different baits, it seems like, soft plastics just are not all as effective as hard baits. Hard baits really start playing a huge role in wintertime fishing. So a lot of the baits I'm going to show you represent that whole thing. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about these wintertime baits. All right, so the first category of bait, and I'm not really going to be getting into like specific exact like bait models generally in this, so each category is kind of a little bit open-ended to different bait designs. All right, so I'm going to show you my favorite within each category, and you can either try the same baits that I'm talking about, or you can kind of go experiment with different baits within each category. The first category of wintertime baits that I absolutely love, this is probably my absolute favorite when I can get on this bite, which is pretty common this time of year, especially in the state of Tennessee. I'm a happy guy. Now, when I first moved to Tennessee, I really wasn't much of a crankbait guy. I had thrown a lot of crankbaits over my career, but primarily shallow crankbaits and lipless crankbaits. Those are kind of my bread and butter in the crankbait category. But like deeper style crankbaits were actually a weakness of mine. But moving to Tennessee, one of the things you got to get good at is throwing a crankbait. And I quickly learned when I started fishing during the wintertime in Tennessee that, man, you just can't beat a small finesse style deep diving crankbait or moderate diving crankbait. So that is the first category of my favorite wintertime baits. So right here we've got 3 different crankbaits that I lean on pretty darn hard this time of year. 2 of them I've been fishing for at least the last 6 or 7 years, even further, in some cases, and another one that I've kind of added to the lineup of my favorite crankbaits for wintertime. So during the wintertime, I'm not generally throwing like big, giant deep divers like, like a 10XD or even a 6XD or like a DT20 or something like that. That's not really my jam during the wintertime. I haven't had success fishing super deep diving crankbaits, but what I have had success with is using crawfish imitating what I call finesse crankbaits, which are smaller crankbaits. They're generally, pretty tiny, just smaller in general, something like this size right here. They dive around, 6 to maybe 10 feet. Okay. But the primary thing is that they're really good crawfish imitators. And during the wintertime, I feel like there's a couple different transitions that we see as far as the forage species that the fish are focusing on. I would say early wintertime, it's more of a shad type deal. So this may not, the crankbait bite might not even pick up until like January or even February in some cases. In December, I might be throwing more shad imitation, some of the other baits I'm going to show you. But when they start switching from shad to eating more crawfish, crankbaits like these, this right here is the Rapala DT6. The DT6 is probably my OG favorite for this time of year. Wintertime cranking, the DT6 is really, really phenomenal. It's got a really tight wobble to it. It's got almost, you know, depending on the crankbait that you're using, you know, one of the great things about like a DT6 is that it's made of balsa. So it's a beautiful thing, but it can also be a little bit frustrating because balsa or any wood is going to be inconsistent in its, you know, in the density and its overall buoyancy. But most of the DT6s out there have a very slow rise to it. It's not a quick rise at all. And so I like that during the wintertime, but I also like the real tight wobble that narrow bill gives you. So it works really good crawling over rocks. It has a nice tight wobble to it, and it just overall is just a really huge fish catcher this time of year. And by the way, all the products that we're talking about today that I mentioned specifically are going to be in the description below, so you can check those out. But the DT6 is like one of my absolute favorites. I think if you talk to anybody that cranks during the wintertime, the DT6 from Rapala is going to be like top of the list. Another crankbait that I really love to throw this time of year is this one right here. This is the rock crawler. You know, the original wigglewort. I think I've got some OGs in here. Let me pull one out for you. I got a bunch actually in this tackle box, but hardly ever use them. You know, wigglewort is an old bait that got really popular, especially in the Midwest, like Table Rock and the White River chain. It's a phenomenal bait. It crawls over rocks really well, has this crazy erratic action where like it'll skip a beat, you know, hit an object and like roll to the side real fast. So very erratic hunting action as it's crawling over those rocks. But honestly, as much as I love the wigglewort, I hate, you know, having to use one of the old wiggleworts to have confidence in them because there's, you know, I've only got so many of them. And once I started fishing the Spro rock crawler, I kind of just phased out my old wiggleworts, to be completely honest. The new ones are just fine too, by the way. You can catch plenty of fish on new wiggleworts. Let's see if I can find one in here. I also have a lot of the Brads, but like this right here, the Storm wigglewort, there's nothing wrong with this bait. You know, there is a bigger cult following of the old wiggleworts. The material was a little bit different. The action's a little bit different. The sound is a little bit different. But overall, man, I'm telling you, I love the rock crawler. It has a great erratic action. It crawls over rocks really well. It comes in some really phenomenal, realistic colors, which I really like. Great crawfish patterns for sure. And it comes in different, you know, size bills for different depth zones and things like that. So really love a rock crawler this time of year. And then finally, a new addition to my favorite crankbaits for wintertime is this one right here. This is the Berkley Dime 6. So very similar to a DT6 as far as shape and size. The bill is much wider, so it does have a little bit of a wider action, but not too much. It's still got a fairly tight wobble to it, but it's made of plastic, so you got the extra rattle. So if it's a little bit dirtier water, and maybe maybe you want a little bit more buoyancy because you're snagging a lot, this bait has all that. So really great bait, and it comes in some really good finishes. So I do like this one as well. But those are my three favorite. If I was to throw a fourth one in there, I'd say like the Bandit 200 is a really good one. I like that more specifically like early in the you know, the winter time, maybe even in the fall. The Bandit 200 works really good. So little finesse crankbaits like the DT6, the Dime 6, and the rock crawlers, those are really great baits. And also, I will mention, I'm going to put all the tackle that I use with each of these baits that I'm mentioning in the description below, so those links will be there too. But yeah, All right, everybody, so I just want to interrupt this video real quick for a cause that I hold near and dear to my heart that I think is super important, way more important than fishing. So hang in there with me real quick. Essentially, you know, December is a time period of holiday season. You know, you've got Christmas right around the corner. You're spending time with friends and family. For many people, it's the best time of the year. But I want to recognize that right now, as everybody's having a great time, there are people that are going through the toughest times of their life at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, trying to beat childhood cancer. And St. Jude is just an absolute godsend. We went through the experience last year. My daughter got diagnosed with a neuroblastoma cancer at 10 months old. And now, thanks to St. Jude, she is cancer-free and we're living a normal life with lots of hope. There's a quote on the halls of St. Jude that really spoke to me from the founder of St. Jude, Danny Thomas, that says, "I'd rather get $1 from 1,000,000 people than get $1 million from one person." And to me, that means that awareness and banding together for a common cause is more important than just the money. And that's what I want to focus on this December. For this December, instead of asking you just to open-ended donate to the fundraiser that we've got, I want to call on you guys to every single person that I can, donate $5, just $5. If everybody just donates $5 to St. Jude, that is a small donation per person, but a huge impact for hundreds of families that are going through the hardest experience of their lives. So if you're interested, which I hope you are, go check out the link in the description below for my St. Jude fundraiser. Every penny goes to St. Jude, and every penny goes to beating childhood cancer. Thank you, guys. Let's get back to fishing. So the next category that gets really good this time of year is, if I can get it unstuck, I should have prepared all this, is a suspending jerkbait. Jerkbaits are standard wintertime baits, in my opinion. You know, when things get really cold and you maybe even start getting some shad kills this time of year, there's nothing better than throwing a jerkbait to imitate those stunned and dying shad. And yeah, man, it just is a major player. We've learned over the last several years with forward-facing sonar techniques that jerkbait is really good throughout the year, not just during cold water periods. But I'll tell you, man, some of the best fishing you'll ever have during the wintertime is going to be on a jerkbait. And I really like it in December, like this time of year when the fish are still really hyper-focused on shad. The water hasn't got into the 40s yet. You know, once you get into the 40s, this oftentimes can start slowing down and it becomes more situational. But if the water is in the low 50s and it's still getting colder and the fish are still hyper-focused on shad, a jerkbait can be really good every single day, you know, for quite a while. I'm not saying January and February and March you can't catch them on a jerkbait. There's going to be some really great days where all the stars align for this bite to be the deal. But I will say that there are, you know, when it does get really cold, you have to do very specific things to this to get them to eat it. And the big deal, talking about specific things to catch more fish on a jerkbait, the big deal with a suspending jerkbait like this or a slow sinking jerkbait, you either want a suspending jerkbait where it just sits perfectly still in one spot in the water column or has a very slow fall. So this one right here is the Berkley Stunna 112. This is, I mean, honestly, when the Stunna came out, this quickly became one of my favorite jerkbaits of all time, and it is a slow sinker, as well as the Mega Bass. So the Mega Bass 110 is another one that is a slow sinker, and this is another favorite of mine, you know, for fishing during the wintertime. I would say it's the Stunna 112, the Vision 110, And also, another new addition to jerkbaits from last year is the Maverick 110 from Rapala. I really, really like this jerkbait too. I'm still experimenting with it. You know, I haven't, you know, totally adopted as one of my all-time favorites, but it's quickly becoming a favorite of mine. Just a really great jerkbait. But in general, despite the type of jerkbait that you're fishing, it's all about finding the right cadence, okay? So the mixture of action that you're imparting with your rod tip, which there's plenty of videos that I've done to show you how to you know, work a suspending jerkbait. But it's not just how fast or you know how you're working that bait with your rod tip. It's also about the length of pauses and how many pauses you incorporate into that retrieve. This time of year, I would say that the length of pauses is the most important variable. More important than the you know how aggressive you move this bait. You know, because a lot of the bites when it gets really cold are going to come on the pause, and sometimes you could be waiting up to 10 seconds, you know, or more sometimes with it just sitting there in front of the fish. So there's some days that you'll just do kind of your normal kind of jerk pause for 2 seconds and then continue that cadence. But there's some days that the pause is super critical. Like just letting it sit there is the deal. So you really have to experiment. I would say of all the different reaction baits on the market for fishing for bass, a jerkbait is one that you really need to be very, very aware where you're getting the bites and where you're not getting the bites too, as far as how you're fishing it. So anyways, jerkbaits are going to be a big player during the wintertime. That is really not a secret. That's something that I think a lot of people know. The next bait is one that, depending on you know where you live in the country and you know what kind of cover you have and the topography, you may or may not use a lot. I think that on highland reservoirs and deeper reservoirs, it is a bait that is underutilized, so very underrated. But for shallow fisheries, you know, you talk about like Sam Rayburn or something like that, where you have a lot of shallow flats that maybe you have a lot of grass. It's definitely a popular one, but we're talking about a lipless crankbait. A lipless crankbait is one of the best wintertime tools, and although, as I mentioned, shallow fisheries tend to already, these tend to be very popular in shallow fisheries. On deep fisheries, they're totally underutilized. A lipless crankbait is very unique in that, as opposed to other crankbaits, it is not buoyant at all. It sinks like a rock to the bottom. And so you can fish it on the bottom, you know, in little yo-yo, type of techniques, or even drag it on the bottom super, super slow, and it can be very effective. On shallower lakes, generally, you're going to be using yo-yo techniques, allowing it to kind of sink into the grass and pull it out, you know, lifting your rod tip up and down. Or even just making long fan casts and bringing it back to boat, ripping it through the grass. But a lipless crankbait is overall a great presentation. Number one, because it sinks and is very versatile in that how you can fish it can be changed up all the time. It's got a very tight wobble to it, and it also has a lot of rattles in it. So a lipless crankbait like this red-eye shad, this is actually the big version of the red-eye shad. It can be very good. And again, you want to focus on more shad patterns when the fish are focusing on shad earlier in the winter. And then once you get into like January, February, March, you might want to focus more on crawfish patterns at that point. But lipless crankbait, great wintertime bait, and often discounted or forgotten on deeper fisheries. And I think that that is a big mistake, because I've caught them, you know, really, really super deep, fishing it almost like a spoon on, you know, highland reservoirs over the years. All right, so the next bait let's throw a soft plastic bait in the mix. So this is one of the few soft plastic baits that I think is still a key player during the wintertime. I've talked a lot about it. In fact, I've recently done quite a few videos on it. But a small swim bait is going to be a really, really great player during the wintertime, you know, especially right now. But I fish it on Chickamauga. It's like one of my favorite baits. December, January, February starts kind of dying down a little bit. I think fish really start focusing more on crawfish, but they still will eat a small swim bait. But a tiny little swim bait like this is the Z-Man Minnows, and I've got it on a Headlocks HD jig head. Great bait for fishing during the wintertime. It's just one of those that I'm generally fishing it in shallow water. You know, if the fish are still, you know, crashing on shad in shallow water around like shallow grass or something like that, which is very common on Lake Chickamauga and other lakes in the area. I'll just fan cast it around those flats with spinning gear and just reel it very fairly quick underneath the surface. But in deeper water situations, maybe you're using forward-facing sonar and you're trying to get suspended fish, it may be more of a slow roll technique. But a small swim bait can be very effective during the wintertime. On Chick, like I said many times before, I've caught more fish on that little swim bait than just about anything. But it's one of the very few soft plastic baits that I will lean on pretty hard this time of year. All right, so we're getting into the nitty-gritty here. The next bait is going to be a really, really important one for especially when things get really cold and reaction baits just are not going to play as big of a role anymore. A football jig. Football jigs are really, really good this time of year. I recall, you know, before everything with forward-facing sonar, you know, kind of exploded, I recall a football jig being like my primary player for most tournaments in you know, January and February on rocky impoundments. So places like Lake Douglas in Tennessee or Dale Hollow in Tennessee, or you know, any place that has deep contours or steeper contours, lots of rock. I would find main lake and secondary points and run patterns just throwing a football jig. And a football jig is really good during later parts of December because you can fish it as slow as you want to and as slow as the fish want it, and it imitates the most valuable prey species when the water gets super, super cold. And in my opinion, that's crawfish. And it does that very, very well. So you match it with a soft plastic or a Lastec trailer of your choosing. Usually I'm going to be using like a do-nothing chunk style trailer, you know, that doesn't have any like kicking action or anything like that. I don't think that that's very realistic during the winter time to have something move a lot. So something that's just more of a do-nothing chunk tends to work really well. And I just drag it really, really slow. Like I said, usually I'm finding secondary points or main lake points, but also channel swing banks are all great situations to throw a football jig. So this is another one that in recent years hasn't been playing as much in tournaments just because of the how prolific forward-facing sonar has become, but is still one that you're going to be able to go out and catch a lot of fish with. And you don't need all the technology to do it. The final category of bait that I love during the wintertime, and this is one that I've just slowly started, you know, not becoming aware of. I've known about it for a long time, but I just kind of was resistant to it because I was using other techniques, but is undeniable when the water is super cold is a blade bait like this. So blade baits are essentially, they're almost like a lipless crankbait. They pretty much are, and usually they're made just of straight metal, and they've got 3 different options as far as the ties. So you can change the amount of vibration from very tight to a wider wobble. Usually I'm just going to be using the hole in the middle there as my primary, just because I feel like it's a good all-around action that it puts off, vibration and all that, and it works well with how I'm fishing it. And how I'm fishing this bait is, again, varied, like the Lipless Crankbait. You can do a lot of different things. You can fish it really slow on the bottom, just dragging it on the bottom, or you can make small hops, which is my favorite. You know, just a slow yo-yo technique where you're just feeling the vibration of the bait and then dropping it back down to the bottom, and you do that through the strike zone and then bring it back to the boat. Or you can fish it like a Lipless Crankbait, just cast and reel style back to the boat. So there's a lot that you can do with a blade bait, but it's one that, man, again, I thought that maybe a Lipless Crankbait would do the same thing, but there's something special about a blade bait. I'm not 100% what it is, but fish just eat it up during the wintertime. And so I've put some of my favorites, which include the Demiki Vault on there. That's actually my favorite one of the blade baits out in the market. So I'm going to put that in the link below. But anyways, guys, those are the baits that I love throwing this time of year. They're just tried and true. I'm not saying change everything that you're doing and switch over to these baits, but if you're struggling during the winter time and you want to you know, seek out some new techniques to try, these are some tried and true ones that definitely catch a lot of fish under certain circumstances. So thank you guys for watching. Check out the links below, and also check out that St. Jude fundraising link in the description below. You know, December is holiday season time, and there's a lot of people at St. Jude that are going through the toughest times of their life. And if we all just donate $5 to St. Jude, if we all do that, we're talking about a big, big impact. So consider using that link and donating $5 with me for December. Thank you guys for watching. I'm going to see you out in the water. Trust the process.